Did you know that the Celts believed human life was cyclical? Hello and welcome to World History Encyclopedia. My name is Kelly and today's video is all about the ancient Celtic religion, gods and goddesses, druids and afterlife beliefs. Don't forget, the easiest way to support us is by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel and hitting that bell icon for notifications so you don't miss out on any new uploads. If you haven't already heard, World History Encyclopedia has teamed up with Andante Travels to bring you the Treasures of Ancient Greece guided tour. Join our expert tour guide, Dr. Rita Roussos, as she takes you on a journey through classical Athens to Delphi, across the Gulf of Corinth and into the Peloponnesian hills, where the hero Hercules began his 12 labours, and King Agamemnon set out to rescue Helen and capture Troy. Make sure to visit worldhistory.travel or hit the link in the description below to learn all about this amazing trip, and we hope to see you there. The ancient Celts, who occupied parts of Western and Central Europe during the Late Bronze Age and through to the Iron Age, believed in a polytheistic religion for which we are lacking in written sources. What we do know comes from the archaeological remains of the culture and writings of classical authors, which has helped us piece together some key gods, sacred sites, and ritual practices of the Celts. Throughout the span of the ancient Celtic civilization and across the wide region they inhabited, there was variation in the religious practice, but we do know that there were common features that linked them all, including reverence for sacred groves and other natural sites like rivers and springs, offerings to the gods in the form of food, animals, and very rarely human sacrifices, and the inclusion of grave goods in burials. Since we don't have any written records, we don't know anything about the Celts' beliefs about their origins, the universe, or their place in it, which has left an incomplete picture of their gods, beliefs, and practices. The ancient Celts believed that natural sites like rivers, lakes, and bogs were sacred, and water was a conduit to the otherworld, which made rivers and springs even more sacred. Rituals and ceremonies were held on hilltops, on mountains, and in sacred groves, especially oak tree groves, and even specific individual oak trees could be sacred. These sacred places were all considered potential meeting places between the physical world and the supernatural worlds. In spaces closer to urban settings, there may have been additions of shrines, temples, or ritual gates, and the ancient Celts probably used the megalithic structures that had been set up centuries earlier, as well as developing their own religious architecture. The sacred sites were often adorned with statues of the gods, usually depicted in wood, not stone, although stone representations of gods did become more popular after the Roman conquest. From the 4th century BCE, the Celts began erecting stone temples, and these temples were often given monumental doorways decorated in paintings and reliefs. They believed that the head was the home of the soul, so it really isn't all that surprising that a common decoration in these temples were masks, and even human heads from sacrificial victims. We know that the ancient Celts had hundreds of deities, although there was a combination of universal gods venerated by all the Celtic people and some local gods that were only worshipped in particular regions. We also know that the Celtic religion and their gods and practices were influenced by earlier cultures, neighbouring peoples, and as the Roman Empire expanded, the ancient Celts adopted and adapted many facets of the Roman religion into their own. The burial practices, votive inscriptions, and rituals that we know of tell us that the gods were believed to either control humanity in some way, or that they, at the very least, had a strong influence on the welfare of the Celtic people. Gods were associated with powers that often overlapped with other deities, concerning warfare, lightning, rivers, the sun, families, or particular tribes. Gods, and in particular local deities, would often be associated with aspects of everyday ancient Celtic society, like tribal identity, protection of specific groups like children and mothers, healing, and hunting. The god venerated most widely was Lugus, who is now better known as Lu, and who represented the sun and light, and was believed to be all-wise and all-seeing. The god most commonly depicted, though, was Cernunnos, the horned god, most famously depicted on the Gundestrup Cauldron. He is a fairly mysterious figure who was often shown seated and wearing horns or antlers. Other major deities included the goddess Epona, who was associated with horses, Sequana, who was a healing goddess and particularly venerated in central France, Brigantia, who the Romans equated with Nike and victory, and who was an important goddess in Britain. Esuss, who was perhaps a patron of crafts with his hammer-like staff, and Rhenus, who was the god of the Rhine river. There were also the cases of the gods that were depicted as a trio, which perhaps represent three different aspects of the same divinity, like the three mother goddesses known as the matronae, who individually represent concepts of strength, fertility, and power. Of course, this is just a small handful of the hundreds of deities that were worshipped throughout the ancient Celtic society. Animals were also important to the Celts and may have even been considered sacred, especially the bull, boar, stag, and horse. They appear in designs on weapons and armour, since the Celts regarded them as totems that had protective qualities. Druids were the religious leaders in the ancient Celtic community and are known for their great wisdom and knowledge of religious traditions. Not only did the Druids perform religious rituals like sacrifices to the gods, but they were also able to give practical help through interpreting natural events, divining the future, and creating medicinal potions and remedies, with the special use of sacred plants like mistletoe. Since Druids claimed they could foresee the future and interpret omens, they were also keen astronomers and were experts in the use of calendars. Druids kept the knowledge of their community and could even place taboos on people in order to ensure everyone was following the rules of the community. These taboos could be something as mundane as not eating a particular type of meat. But it was believed that if you didn't obey, death or misfortune would follow for the perpetrator and their family. We don't have much evidence at all that women could be druids, but there is also no evidence suggesting that they couldn't be, and the general lack of information on druids in general has led to very fanciful interpretations of the role of the druid in ancient Celtic society. We do know, though, that they held a high place in society, and according to Julius Caesar, they didn't pay taxes and they didn't have to perform military service. To become a fully practicing druid, you had to train for some 20 years. And the emphasis on oral learning means that we don't have any first-hand written records of their activities. There have been archaeological finds of unusual headgear, which often consisted of bronze leaf-shaped pieces, cones or discs, and sometimes even horn or antler attachments that would not have had a military function. So it's believed that the Druids may have worn this, with perhaps long white robes. The schedule of rituals were determined by the cycles of astronomy, nature, and in particular, the phases of the moon. These natural cycles gave rise to the belief in the cyclical nature of human life, as well as the birth and death of gods and spirits. The god of the year, for example, would die in autumn to be reborn in spring. The gods were offered prayers and incantations, and to thank or appease them, or to gain favour for future events, or to avoid disasters like famine or war, votive offerings were made at sacred sites. These votive offerings ranged from foodstuffs and decorated weapons and armour to jewellery, pottery, or even small models of a body part that was afflicted with an illness. At sacred water sites, these offerings were often thrown in the depths, and excavations at Anglesey have uncovered swords and shields, cauldrons, animal bones, and spear points. Animals like oxen, dogs, or horses were often sacrificed to the gods, and they were burned or buried at the site. Part of the animal would often be eaten in a feast before the remains would be left as an offering to the gods. Although rarely, humans were also sacrificed to the gods, and the most common source of sacrificial offering were likely captured enemy warriors. The standard manner for ritual killings, as seen on the Lindo man, who was found in a bog near Cheshire in England, was to be hit on the head, strangled, then have the throat cut. Sometimes though, the manner of death depended on the god, like for Esuss, they were hung from a tree and their limbs were removed, or for Rhenus, the sacrificial victim was placed in a wooden vessel or hollow tree and then burnt alive. To the delight of archaeologists, hoards of precious goods were buried in shallow pits. These deposits were often added to over time, and a number of hoards were found close together, which suggests the place of burial was sacred in some way, and the number of goods found in these deposits indicate a greater meaning than just a safe place to deposit them, but that ritual meaning has been lost. Amulets were believed to be a form of protection for both the living, but also the deceased on their journey to the underworld. These amulets have been found primarily in the graves of women and children. It was believed they could ward off bad luck and could take very unusual forms like mini wheels, feet, shoes, and axes. Since burials were accompanied by grave goods, we can safely say that the Celts had a strong belief in the afterlife. Those individuals who were a part of the higher echelons of the ancient Celtic society were buried with a number of possessions, including weapons, armour, tools, eating utensils, feasting goods, clothing, board games, and precious goods like bronze vessels and gold jewellery. Those of importance were often buried in a wood-lined chamber deep in a large earthen mound. Often they would be laid out in a four-wheeled wagon, which had usually been disassembled, and dressed in their finery. Gradually though, flat graves replaced the use of burial mounds. People being buried with grave goods indicates that the ancient Celts believed the deceased would need them, either on their afterlife journey or at their next destination, or both. What we know of the Celts' belief in the otherworld is very limited, but it may have been considered much like mortal life, but without the bad stuff like disease, pain, and sorrow, as was the view of the medieval European Celts. Not all Celts were buried though, and from the 2nd century BCE onwards, cremation became more popular, which was probably an influence from Mediterranean cultures. They also sometimes left the corpse exposed to the elements, and then the bones were either buried or kept for future religious ceremonies. The beliefs that informed their daily lives, including the cyclical nature of existence, seem to have equally informed their view of the afterlife. Nothing ever died, but only changed form to live again either on Earth or elsewhere in the presence of the gods. What's your favourite part of Celtic religion? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our new videos every Tuesday and Friday. This video was brought to you by World History Encyclopedia. For more great articles and interactive content, head to our website via the link below. World History Encyclopedia is a non-profit organisation and you can find us on Patreon, a brilliant site where you can support our work and receive exclusive benefits in return. Your support helps us create videos twice a week, so make sure to check it out via the pop-up in the top corner of the screen or via the Patreon link down below. Thank you so much for watching and we will see you soon with another video.